Star Trek has been around for over 5 decades, and yet it still surprises even its most loyal fans. From starship battles to Klingon clashes, we've seen it all, or have we? Hidden within the adventures of Captain Kirk and his crew are some curious details that have gone unnoticed for years. Whether it's a minor wardrobe malfunction, a clever Easter egg, or a set piece that doesn't quite belong, there are some fascinating slip-ups and behind-the-scenes secrets that even the biggest Trekkie might have missed. Join us as we dig deep into these little-known quirks and fun facts that make Star Trek even more interesting. The Star Trek series. Star Trek is one of the biggest names in science fiction and pop culture. It all began in the 1960s with a TV show created by Gene Roddenberry. This series, which aired first in Canada on September 6, 1966, and 2 days later in the US, followed the adventures of the starship USS Enterprise and its crew as they traveled through space, exploring new worlds and civilizations. The goal, according to the tagline, was to boldly go where no man has gone before. That tagline captured the spirit of discovery that made the show so unique. The original series was inspired by a mix of things, from old novels like Gulliver's Travels to 1950s sci-fi movies and even TV westerns. Despite only running for 3 seasons, it quickly became a cult hit and laid the foundation for what would become a massive franchise. Since then, Star Trek has expanded into movies, more TV shows, video games, comics, and books. It's become a global phenomenon, and fans, often called Trekkies or Trekkers, are some of the most passionate out there. Speaking of which, the franchise has even had its own attractions, like a themed exhibit in Las Vegas, and inspired a made-up language, Klingon. But beyond entertainment, Star Trek also broke new ground by showing a diverse cast and tackling social issues, which was rare for its time. So it wasn't just about spaceships and aliens. It had a deeper message about unity and understanding, making it much more than just a sci-fi series. But even an iconic series like Star Trek has its share of hidden quirks and unexpected goofs. From tiny errors to surprising details, there are things that even the most devoted fans might have missed. Hidden problems in Star Trek. You probably missed. First up, let's talk about the transporter. It's one of the coolest gadgets in the Star Trek universe, letting characters beam up or down instantly. But if you think about it, it's also one of the most unreliable. It seems like just about anything can mess with a transporter's function: shields, radiation, even a bit of atmospheric interference. And the results are often dangerous. Characters could end up with objects fused into their bodies, split into good and evil versions of themselves, or even transported to a mirror universe where their evil twins wreak havoc. Pretty risky, right? So how do you avoid all this chaos? Simple. Just hop in a shuttlecraft instead. Then there's the issue of the aliens. Have you ever noticed how most aliens in Star Trek look so human? Nearly every alien race has the same basic structure: 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, and they all stand upright. Across the series, over 50 different alien species look almost exactly like humans. But why? It's not like the human form is the best shape from an evolutionary standpoint. The writers even tried to explain this in an episode of The Next Generation called The Chase. In it, they suggest that billions of years ago, an ancient race spread their DNA across the galaxy, making all aliens look similar. While this sounds like a pretty weak excuse, the real reason is likely budget limitations. Think about how Doctor Who or Star Wars has such diverse aliens. Star Trek could definitely have been more creative here. And then, of course, we have the idea that humans are always right. If you watch closely, you'll see a pattern where alien races in Star Trek are often shown as having backward customs, whether it's due to superstition, bigotry, or some other flawed belief. And who swoops in to set them straight? The always perfect crew of the Enterprise. They are quick to criticize or teach these civilizations, but rarely seem to learn anything themselves. Isn't this journey supposed to be about discovery? The only one who seems to learn anything is Data, and all he discovers is how great it is to be human. Over time, this can make the human characters seem a bit too self-righteous. Even when they face powerful beings like the Q, humans still seem to have all the answers. These quirks add a unique charm to the series, but they also show that even the best sci-fi isn't perfect. The stuck characters and recycled stories of Star Trek. While Star Trek takes us on incredible journeys through space, where the crew encounters strange new worlds and mind-blowing phenomena, but the thing is that no one ever seems to change. For example, Captain Kirk, Dr. McCoy, Captain Picard, Riker, Geordi LaForge, Scotty, all of them remain the same from start to finish. You would expect that all those wild adventures would leave some kind of mark on them, right? But no, it's like they hit a reset button after each episode. The characters don't evolve or grow, which makes the show feel more like a video game than a meaningful story. Then, there's the issue of the recycled plots. You'd think that exploring the vast cosmos would bring new and exciting challenges each time, but many Star Trek episodes feel like they are pulling from the same hat of ideas. The writers seem to repeat the same basic stories, just swapping in different characters or locations. It gets to the point where if you've seen one, you've seen them all. For some fans, this makes watching an entire series feel more like a chore than a thrill, a true test of dedication. While Star Trek has its fair share of iconic moments and memorable stories, these recurring issues can make the series feel less fresh. And yet, for many fans, these quirks are part of the charm that makes Star Trek the phenomenon it is today. Speaking of quirks, we're not done talking about them yet. Hidden details in Star Trek you probably never noticed. When Star Trek the original series hit TV screens in the 1960s, it introduced audiences to an entirely new world, complete with strange aliens, futuristic gadgets, and the mysteries of the Federation. But to bring this universe to life, the show's creators had to get creative with a limited budget. And boy, did they get creative. The team, led by set designer Walter M. Jeffries, often had to make props and sets from everyday items or even trash. They did such a great job that you might have missed some of these hidden details. Let's start with the Klingons. Now, to be honest, have you ever noticed their fancy-looking belt buckles? Well, they aren't that fancy at all. Those shiny gold accessories are just bubble-wrap painted gold. It's hard to believe, but it's true. And hey, they weren't the only ones doing this sort of thing. Batman's utility belt was once made out of sponges. Well, that's making the most of what you've got. But the crew's resourcefulness didn't stop there. Take the Phasaerus, a spherical spaceship seen in the episode The Corbomite Maneuver. This ship looks impressive on screen, but in reality, it was made from ping-pong balls cut in half and glued together. Who knew ping-pong balls could look so futuristic? Then there's the story of James Doohan, who played Scotty. Before Star Trek, Doohan served as a soldier in World War II, and he lost a finger in battle. He rarely showed his right hand on screen to hide this fact, but if you look closely, you can spot it in some scenes, like when he carries a platter of tribbles. A small detail, but one with a powerful story behind it. And speaking of things you might not have noticed, let's talk about the opening credits. William Shatner, who played Captain Kirk, had a clause in his contract that made sure his name was always bigger than Leonard Nimoy's, Spock. A memo from 1966 even states that Nimoy's name could only be 75% of the size of Shatner's. They did add "also starring" above Nimoy's name later on, but the font size rule stuck. Now about Captain Kirk's middle name, did you know it wasn't always Tiberius? In the early days of the show, the second pilot episode titled "Where No Man Has Gone Before" shows a tombstone with his name listed as James R. Kirk. Well, that must have been confusing for fans who were used to hearing James T. Kirk. Now here's another fun tidbit. In the third season's opening episode, Spock's Brain, the show did something unique with special effects. It's the only episode, aside from the very first pilot, where characters walk in front of a moving star field on the view screen. Normally, the stars were a static image or added later with special effects, but for this episode, they used a rear projection technique to make the stars move in real time. It might not seem like a big deal now, but back then, it was a clever bit of visual trickery. 21 wild facts about Star Trek, the original series only true fans know. Now, if you've been a die-hard fan of Star Trek, chances are you have a deep knowledge of the series, quirks too. Thanks to comprehensive sites like Memory Alpha, fans can dive into the details of guest stars, alien species, and individual episodes. But back in 1966, when the original series first aired, there was no internet, and the fandom was still in its infancy. Despite this, those involved with the show knew they were part of something big. They kept meticulous notes, photos, and memorabilia, which old-school fans have been studying for years. One little-known fact is that the on-set explosions caused real problems. In The Apple, when Spock throws a rock that explodes, the sound was so loud that it gave the actors tinnitus. DeForest Kelly McCoy had a ringing in his ears for years, and William Shatner's hearing, already damaged from another explosion, worsened significantly. He eventually found relief through the American Tinnitus Association. Now, wildlife incidents also added to the chaos. During the filming of Where No Man Has Gone Before, bees invaded the studio, stinging Shatner and Sally Kellerman. And in Shore Leave, a Bengal tiger broke free during filming, terrifying the cast. Shatner was only 6 feet away from the tiger and later admitted he was genuinely scared. Shatner and Leonard Nimoy's relationship had its rough patches too. In an interview for a documentary in 2001, Shatner recalled making a joke at Nimoy's expense while Nimoy was grieving his father's death. Nimoy was understandably upset and didn't speak to Shatner for weeks. However, they later laughed about the incident. And then do you remember when Terry Garr had a notoriously bad experience on set during Assignment Earth? She's been quiet about it ever since, and some believe it was due to Roddenberry's insistence on altering her costume, which led to uncomfortable situations. Lucille Ball, co-founder of Desilu Productions, was hands-on with the show's production. During the shooting of the second pilot, Where No Man Has Gone Before, she joined the crew in sweeping sand from the camera tracks to keep the production on schedule. She even joked about doing it to get the rap party started. Star Trek's behind-the-scenes secrets and shocking facts. Star Trek fans often think of the iconic miniskirt uniforms from the 1960s as a sign of the times, but they were actually quite progressive. In the 60s, miniskirts were seen as a bold and liberating fashion choice. The show's costume designer was tasked with making the uniforms more attractive, and it was actress Grace Lee Whitney, Janice Rand, who suggested the miniskirts. These weren't just ordinary skirts, they were actually shorts with a skirt flap on top, a design that became famous and stirred quite a bit of controversy. While the costumes might seem provocative, the men on set also faced their share of objectification. Captain Kirk frequently found himself shirtless, and not just for the ladies. In the episode Who Mourns for Adonais, actor Michael Forrest, who played Apollo, was asked to take off his shirt for his audition. During filming, they even taped his chest to highlight his muscles, which he found quite surprising and amusing. Speaking of which, behind the scenes, there were some intriguing antics involving Gene Roddenberry and Majel Barrett. Roddenberry, who was having an affair with Barrett, wanted to keep her on the show after NBC had initially rejected her. To trick NBC, Barrett dyed her hair blonde and pretended to be someone else. Roddenberry and Barrett hoped this would fool the network into bringing her back. Barrett's new character, Nurse Christine Chappell, became a regular part of the series. Despite their efforts, NBC eventually figured it out, but Barrett's role remained integral to the show. Majel Barrett's legacy with Star Trek didn't end with her roles on the show. Did you know when she passed away in 2008, she left behind a $4 million trust for her dogs? They received a mansion to live in and $1 million for their caretaker, Reinelda Estupinian. Barrett felt Estupinian cared for the dogs even better than she did herself, and Estupinian got to live in the mansion as well. But like any other series, Star Trek also had its share of drama involving its cast. There was a bit of drama too. John Drew Barrymore, Drew Barrymore's father, was hired for a role in The Alternative Factor. However, he didn't show up for filming and was later found to have disappeared. As a result, the production had to quickly replace him with Robert Brown, who was pulled from his birthday celebration to save the shoot. Barrymore's absence led to a grievance with the Screen Actors Guild, resulting in a 6-month suspension for him. One interesting aspect of Star Trek is its use of reused shots and footage. Due to budget constraints and time limitations, the show often repurposed scenes. For example, in The Way to Eden, Kirk's insignia is on the wrong side of his shirt because the shot was reversed from another episode. This kind of recycling also happened with close-ups and reaction shots, which could sometimes be quite noticeable. Contrary to popular belief, Star Trek did not have the first interracial kiss on American TV. The famous kiss between Kirk and Uhura in Plato's Stepchildren was a groundbreaking moment in fiction, but wasn't the first on TV. The first American TV interracial kiss was on Adventures in Paradise in 1960 between Gardner McKay and Pilar Surratt. Additionally, Nancy Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. shared a kiss on a variety special in 1967, a year before Star Trek's Kiss. British TV had already shown interracial kisses earlier in 1959. These behind-the-scenes secrets and unusual facts showcase the creativity, challenges, and sometimes surprising stories that make Star Trek an enduring and beloved series. Whether it's the inventive costuming, the drama on set, or the quirky details, they all contribute to the rich history of the show. But are we done yet? Not quite. Surprising secrets in Star Trek, the original series. While you might think these are all the quirks and goofs, there's more to uncover. You see, Star Trek, the original series, was crafted on a shoestring budget, forcing the team to be inventive. This meant repurposing everyday objects, getting creative with sets, and even sneaking in a few jokes. The result was a series filled with fun little details and, yes, a few more mistakes that make the show even more charming today. Take the Aldebaran whiskey bottles seen in the show, for example. While that might seem like a fancy space booze, right? But it wasn't. They were actually just bottles of George Dickel Tennessee Sour Mash whiskey. The props team simply slapped a new label on them, and voila, alien whiskey. Now that's called recycling at its finest. There are also some sneaky visual tricks that might have slipped past you. In Shore Leave, the Enterprise is shown orbiting a planet from right to left. This is a rare moment in the series. Usually the starship moves from left to right. This direction change was a trick to hide a familiar detail. The planet in the shot was Earth. You could clearly see the shape of North America. Flipping the shot made it look like a different world. When the series was remastered, they fixed this, making the Enterprise go back to its usual left-to-right path. Speaking of the Enterprise, did you know the Starfleet badges weren't always the same? Today, the arrowhead insignia is a symbol for all of Starfleet. But in the original series, every ship had its own unique badge. For example, in the Doomsday Machine, you can see crew members from the USS Constellation wearing a badge that looks like a pretzel. In the Omega Glory, the USS Exeter crew sports a rectangular one. It wasn't until later movies that the Enterprise's badge became the standard for the entire fleet. Now, Star Trek also had a knack for reusing sets. The show was filmed on the Desilu Studios backlot, which was also home to The Andy Griffith Show. This is why, if you watch closely, you'll see some familiar buildings from Mayberry in episodes like Miri and The City on the Edge of Forever. So if Kirk and Spock look like they're walking through Mayberry, they probably are. And then there are the inside jokes. Some pipes on the Enterprise were labeled GNDN, which stands for Goes Nowhere, Does Nothing. It was a fun little joke for the crew because these pipes, like many of the props, didn't actually serve any function. Even the Trident scanner, one of those flashy gadgets used on the show, didn't do anything. But it sure looked cool. So it's no secret that the production team had to get creative with a limited budget. They used everything from a cheap 29-cent Magic Slate toy for the captain's log to simple office chairs on the Enterprise bridge. Speaking of which, effects master Joe Lombardi often whipped up props from whatever was lying around. But the budget constraints sometimes led to mistakes. Stunt doubles were often easy to spot, and the shadow of a boom microphone would sneak into scenes. Yet all these little errors only add to the charm.